start a day of conversations celebrating information governance and its practitioners by looking back from where we have come. From its humble beginnings in system-specific governance, information governance has come a long, long way. It would be impossible to look back without learning from that view and seeing if we can't let it inform some of where we may go next. So we must look back and look forward. That's what our first hallway conversation is all about. Remember, this is not a presentation. We're trying something new. This is a hallway conversation. Sometimes in the hallway, you meet your friends. Other times, you meet strangers. This panel of experts goes back to the early days of information governance, and each of our panelists has made major contributions to the profession. They haven't just watched information governance appear, they made it appear. I don't think it'll need to be said, but these folks are definitely friends who are reconnecting in the InfoGov.net hallway conversation to talk about where we've been and where we're going next. It's my honor to pass the program along to our first hallway conversationalists, Laurence Hart, Steve Weissman, and Donda Young.
Thanks. I'll have you know, it's also National Cabbage Day. I bet you didn't know that.
I just want to know why Nick had to call us old, like, to start this off. Like, we've been here a long time. I feel very labeled and old. These floppy disks do it well enough without, having Nick hammer the point home. How y'all doing?
We're good. When'd you get in?
When I
get a hallway conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, normally that's the first thing we ask each other is, "Hey, how you doing? When'd you get in? Have you checked in yet?
How was your flight?
Where's that lobby?
Where's the bar? Where's
No. We always know where the bar is when we started off.
That's usually where we meet.
So hopefully Donda will rejoin us in a second. But yeah. So Steve. Without saying that we're old, we have been doing this a while. What was,
Experienced.
Sure. We'll call it experience.
Experience.
Remember what were the events that we used to go to back in the 90s?
In the day?
Back in the
Back in the week?
Those were the old trade shows, right?
I was trying to think, which is itself sometimes a challenge.
Hey, guys.
I want to say my first experience in terms of a show was the early 90s. There was an AIM show in New York City. And I was coming at it from a electronic forms workflow kind of direction, trying to see what was going on, because I thought that was really exciting. I mean, an electronic form, you put it in front of connected to a database, and it's like, oh, you can do all kinds of things. You look stuff up, and you put workflow in the back end. You can route stuff around, and the vendors of the space of the day just all kind of gave me the Scooby-Doo head tilt. I had no idea what I was talking about, but I remember some going to, especially the Tech Data had a party, and I went there because whoever I was with knew somebody. Maybe that's why I don't remember.
Yeah, before we became speakers, we had to know someone to get into those parties.
This is so true.
Now it's like, wait, which one do we want to go to, or do we just want to go off our own thing?
Yes. Oh, goodness.
Y'all remember the first time y'all spoke at an event?
Yeah, actually, I remember my first one. It was actually at InfoGovCon. And
oh, really?
That was my first event. Yeah, I was such a chicken back in the day of doing public speaking. So I did my first one at the first InfoGovCon, which I miss greatly. So
yeah, I've been on a stump since probably the early 80s, believe it or not. I actually started what we now would call an industry analyst when I was in college. And I was 12 years old. But I was doing a lot of stuff with advanced media, things that later became like the web and Google Maps kinds of technologies. I think my highlight, when satellite delivered television first came along, I wrote a research report and was living in Connecticut at the time. And I ran into New York City to do an interview for Entertainment Tonight. It was a 2-part interview. And the second part got bumped because something happened with Hugh Hefner and they put him on instead. And I've never forgiven him. That's the added value of being a true story.
That does go back a while. I used to watch that show because it was like the filler at 7:30 from 7:30 to 8 before prime time started down in Virginia Beach. So we're too lazy to flip the channel, and we're like, we'll leave it there.
I had to get up and change the channel. No, I guess he didn't.
Well, no. Well, I mean, I had to get up and change the channel, but I did it on direct. I was my parents' remote control.
Yeah, well, speaking of things of being remote controlled and of being back in the day, I have to say that I started in this industry as a microfiche individual. Yeah. I was sorting fiche and sending it around to the various different units that had to have that particular information and having to log it in the cold room so that it was protected and having to do disposition on that. It was an interesting thing. Then it moved into filming and indexing, and then I was like, yeah, this is not for me, and moved my way up the ladder, if you will. So it's,
I was going to say,
an interesting challenge.
Teach a man to fish.
I was lucky. I was always kind of on the forefront. I mean, back in the 90s, we were doing electronic enrollment for benefits. And we would generate these benefit statements based on the data, and it would turn out through these huge printers. I mean, yeah, we had to manually change the colors because we could only handle so many, but it would crank through them at some phenomenal speeds. And one of our early conference stories from back then, we went to the old Explore conference to see these giant printers, and they had where they would put spools of paper out to print the stuff out to mail out. And someone one time while it was printing opened up the door to say, hey, look at what this does inside. And the paper shot out a huge roll and went several booths over and covered them in paper until they could manage to turn it off. So, things have definitely changed since then. But
I know, but we're still covered in paper.
We are.
We're not buried. We now have trails and paths. It's not spitting out on us as much. I mean, I remember.
Well, depending on your industry.
Depending on your industry, I suppose. I mean, I remember my first speak was just over 20 years ago, and I was in Chicago to speak at a vendor conference. It was a Documentum's conference. And, I'm sitting there talking about the knowledge portal and how search and, the old Plumtree portal and stuff would integrate and could kind of, give you a cockpit from which to work. And I said, yeah, this is an approach. This is the future. It's my goal that my kids will never have to address this problem. We will solve it before that happens. And I didn't have kids at the time, so it seemed like a totally reasonable bet. So my first child is graduating high school this year, and we have not solved this problem. And now I fear I am going to fail in that goal. Maybe he'll work at retail for a while and not have to deal with this problem, and I have a few more years, but that's
still time.
That's about what it will take for us to solve this problem before he has to deal with it. So,
well, it's funny. You talk about in this way about like predicting the future. Another true story from my sordid past. I won't name names, but they're still in business. But part of my job back then, write these research reports, come up with 10-year forecasts. When you see a press release, such and so says the market's going to grow X%, I was the guy making up the number. Always wrong, of course, but more realistic than some of the outlandish stuff that was also being published elsewhere. And I was at an event once where the publisher of Elsewhere actually said out loud, because somebody asked him, how come your forecast is so wildly high? And he said, because the higher the number I project, the more reports I sell. And I thought, that's probably true, but why would you say that out loud? But I've carried that with me because, I mean, I'm not in the market forecasting game so much anymore. But whenever I hear statements about the future, I kind of factor that in. You know, you want to get quoted in the Wall Street Journal, say something outlandish.
Well, I think part of the problem is these forecasts, even when they're legitimate, they assume that there's a foundation built upon which to build.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about says, oh yeah, there's all this content being managed, and you have all these features and things are going to be built in. But I would say a vast majority of my projects have been putting in content management systems and records management systems where one already existed, but it was a failure because they don't have the policies, they don't have the rules, they don't train the people how to use it, they don't integrate it into their workplace. It's, you know, it's one more task for people to do. You know, I mean, Donda will probably be more familiar since she started in the paper microfiche world, but you know, you would fill things out in triplicate back in the day.
Yes.
And one for the business, for the people who had to do operations, one for the client, so they would have a record of what had happened, and then one for records. And it would go off the records, and it would disappear. And you didn't worry about it. Now we have one digital copy, but, you know, and the business just wants to save it locally or their shared drive or wherever they can find it. Mm-hmm. And there's like, no, we need one copy, but you need to put it where the records people can find it. And meanwhile, the client's going, dude, you know, what's going on? Like, why do I have to fill this out 3 times? Or why did you lose my record? And it's because of that disconnect. And it is frustrating.
It is frustrating. It's I was actually having a conversation about this yesterday with Ann Snyder and how frustrating it has been to be in the industry and still have to run into the same challenges and same problems. And you mentioned earlier, Laurence, that there was a foundation that was missing with these implementations that you're going into. And I can't agree more. Working in the space that I do now, it's very evident that there isn't a foundation in some of those places, and they need better foundations between the people and the processes before they even get to the technology. Because if you don't have those foundations in place, the basic 101 stuff, and I know that sounds very rudimentary, but if you don't have your policies, or if you don't have your people in your firm, in your corporation, that understand at least some basics of records management and how best to collaborate on that information, search on that information, so that all of the parties can find it when they want it and where it needs to be. Throwing technology at it is not going to solve your information governance challenges. I think I actually might say that on my Twitter profile. So, you know, if you're not putting those things in place and you're not willing to embrace change management, you can throw all the tech you want. It doesn't mean that it's going to come out right on the other side of that.
Right, but you can not find things a lot faster.
Well, this is
than
true.
It used to take to not find it.
It takes hours sometimes to search for things, and that's crazy given the technology we have these days. But if we don't have those foundations, we don't have those taxonomies, we don't have the keywords that all of the stakeholders, not just one stakeholder, needs, you're searching.
I mean, why spend the money on some of the cooler machine learning tech, which can categorize and help you find it and evolve and get better at it over time, if you're not even sure if you're capturing all the information, it's not getting in there, or it's spread out among random share drives, or this random floppy disk. By the way, Tetris, best game ever. It's where if you don't have this, you're like, oh, no one's putting it in there. Well, it's got to be the tech. So let's upgrade to a new version of the tech, or we can't afford to keep it all because storage isn't working, or the network's too slow, or whatever. So we go to the cloud. And
it's still too slow.
Well, the kicker is things were actually working in like 98. We were using document management. It was on people's desktops, and you hit save and would go straight to the system. And then this whole web thing came out, and instead of hitting save in Word and it saving it to the thing, you had to go to a website to upload it, which set us back, I think, about, probably about 15 years until, the likes of Dropbox and Box came out. Hey, you can sync your folder up with the web. No metadata, but at least you can hit save as and store it.
But see, even that to me was a problem. If this is what the organization wants to do, I always postulated then and now, don't have two save buttons. Just wire it up on the back end. The user doesn't even see it.
Yeah.
So when I do save, it does put it where it's supposed to go.
Right. Well, we had that. We had that controlled, the save button in Word, and Excel and PowerPoint.
Yeah, the control was always there, but especially at the time, it was rare that I saw anybody do it. They added a menu item.
Oh, no.
Save, and they were saved to repository.
No, we replaced the default save. So you hit save.
Yeah, good.
And it went to the repo. You had to know the magic key to hit to save it locally. So, and we didn't tell everyone.
To a large extent,
we didn't tell everyone.
Yeah, no, but that's the thing. You don't. Donda, to your point about change management, which I agree, it's like right there, neck and neck. As far as that goes, being smart with the interface, it takes a lot of that right off the table because you're literally not asking anybody to do anything differently.
And that's what's been missing.
Part of right. And I've also always postulated that the process, by and large, is still the process. That the tools change, and that's plural, tools, because there isn't one that's going to do everything. But if you keep your eye on the business process, it simplifies a lot of the thinking. It doesn't make the work any easier or less frustrating, but it simplifies a lot of the thinking. It's my old saw, right? What business problem you're trying to solve? And then you work backwards from there. And what do we need to solve it? What do we have that's already kind of solving it? Because it's not rip and replace either necessarily. Like I had a client, and I'm looking, and it's like, gosh, you guys really need workflow. Everything's like to a PDF and through the email. And it turns out they had it. They just never turned it on. It's like, well, you're losing value right there.
Sometimes
it's what I call the flat forehead society.
Sometimes it's just the simplest things that can make a huge adjustment for folks. And I think if you have folks that can help translate the business speak to the tech speak and back, much like a lot of us on this panel, but in the rest of today's events, that's part of what our training has been, is to help guide those business conversations. We're kind of a conduit, and you may have one of those in your organization, and they are struggling like we are to have their voice heard. So, and I know we're all, even the folks that are listening in to us today, they're in the same boat in some places, in some cases. Just try and do what you can to get your voice heard internally at your organization. And try and get that change management to move, even if it's just a little bit of the needle.
Well, and It's critical, and I think the key is we have to go in and say, hey, we want to help to solve the business problem. So Steve, we want to solve the process problem, and we want to make sure that the content generated during the course of that process is captured and retained, as a record. But more importantly, we want to make it, if we say, hey, we do this, and now you can find it and reuse it. So, lead with the benefits of all that we do, because, y'all have seen my image that I use when the records manager walks into a digital transformation project, the look of horror that people have on their faces because, oh my gosh, the requirements just went up, the timeline just got pushed out. Is this even economically worth it anymore? And it's more no. We know where the information is. We know where you can get your answers. So you know what you're tying together. And we just want to make sure that we'll just start off with put it somewhere at the end where we can track it. And it's just that way you can use it again later. And we want to know where that is. We'll apply controls later, but it's more about not about preventing people from accessing it or hiding it away somewhere, but it's just making sure that it's not accidentally deleted. It can be found when necessary, and when it's outlived its usefulness, if it's still a risk and it's not historical in nature, we can clear it out so that the searching is valuable. Donda, you were talking about the search returns, thousands of things, and all of that might have been relevant, but, the policy paper from 10 years ago might not matter, but I do need the policy paper from last year. And if I get rid of all the old stuff, that's not applicable anymore, then that trims that search result down, even if I don't improve my metadata.
Right. And there's one minor issue I want to take with something you said earlier,
sure.
Laurence. And it is...
I mean, I'm right and you're going to be wrong, but go ahead.
Yeah. You'd be right. I'll be left. I don't know that you even meant to intimate it, but one of the things I think it's important for folks to do too is really just get started. Don't wait for anything near perfection. You had made some reference to you don't even know that you're capturing anything or everything. Yeah. And that's true, but I look at that's almost a separate problem because there's plenty of stuff you have that you can get started on making sense of, even if you aren't capturing everything. And in terms of the IG-ness of it all versus, official records-ness, I think that may be where the dividing dotted line may be. Because maybe it's not an official record, but it's got to hang around for a while for whatever reason.
What is an official record? Is a record or it's not?
Well, I was going to get to that, except nobody has time for that.
Yeah, that's a whole different topic. Different hallway.
Yes.
Whole different day.
Yes. My
that's
definition.
Sorry.
My guiding principle is this business critical or not? And there may not be an official records class for it. Whether or not there should be is something that's got to be argued. I mean, negotiated, decided within an organization.
All three.
But in the meantime, you've got stuff, and you don't know maybe what you also ought to be capturing. But don't wait for that.
No.
There's always going to be.
Don't wait, but
you have to do something. Anything.
I think it's. I think it's in parallel. I mean, for me, it's we have this huge swamp of crap, right, in the shared drives or SharePoint, which people treat like shared drives, and it's to me, it's one, stop putting more in there, and not that you don't store it, but get the processes in place so that it is properly handled. Because we can go in and analyze all that old stuff, right? But if we keep adding to it, we have to keep analyzing the more and more stuff. So,
unless you do it when it comes in, it's part
of and if you could do that, but that's part of automating the process, the front end of it.
Yep.
And you do have to eventually go through that old stuff. And machine learning and some of the tools out there are pretty good about that now, especially for finding the fact that I've got 100 copies of the invite for the, 2017 corporate picnic. Everyone's stored so that they could track
Yes.
it. And you could argue that historically speaking, it might be interesting to see the culture in the past, but you don't need that many copies of it. You need one. And
you know what else you find?
over here.
I did a project for a major city government, and it was astonishing. Even their draws dropped, which was really embarrassing. Their jaws dropped because in there were, I don't remember how many scores of CDs that had been ripped and the music stashed, pictures of newborn babies, and like a picture of the first baby of the year born in the city I would get, right? But no, somebody had a baby, and then there's the invitation for the shower, like I said, just gobs of storage space, just because somebody, I don't know, wanted to listen to some tunes while oohing and eyeing over the kid, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I used to have to manage an archive at one of my prior roles, and it was amazing at the stuff that they kept,
Well, and I'm sure you got what I got.
Or some VP or some random, person did something in the community, and it was kept as a historical record for the company. And I'm like, okay, this is great looking back on, retirement parties. This is great stuff. But is it really an archival record? And being able to classify those things coming in, as you said, Steve and Laurence, that'd be great. But the business isn't going to do that. They're not going to.
Well,
they're not going to classify those things coming in. It has to be something that's a little more automated. And do you really want them classifying it?
Well, to me, the kicker was, because we had talked about stuff that might be found, and it was a definitive, no, we don't have any of that stuff. We're not worried about that at all. Which is what you get to when you talk to the IT group, and no, we know about every single SharePoint instance that there is. Want to bet?
Even if they do, they have no idea what's in it.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, it's scary. No one knows, and that's part of the problem. And no one will ever know. But I think we look at, as we kind of turn the needle forward to modern day, where I still have people coming to me saying, hey, we were talking to, this organization, and they said they're at ground zero. I'm like, well, that's nice to have that self-awareness, but do they realize it's 2020? You shouldn't be at ground zero at this point for records management. You should at least be somewhere down the road, even if it's the wrong road. You should be somewhere. And I'm still having those conversations. Yes. But
so am I.
It's shocking. But we look around and what's different in the last 2 or 3 years, besides the fact the obviousness of the pandemic and the world we're living in, is the distributed workforce is a reality. Before it was a few random companies and a few random people, and now it's becoming the default behavior, which means that I can no longer, Donda, if we work together, I couldn't go down to your cube and say, Donda, where did you put this file? Oh, and you could click through and find it, or tell me. I have to grab your attention on chat along with everyone else in the known universe. And you can share screen and show me, but it's not the same. And our ability to find information has gotten harder. And everything's getting thrown into these chats, which are great for that day. But do you remember when we were talking about topic fill in the blank 3 weeks ago? What was said?
No.
Or how about worse? And you do this because you're talking about some issue, and you determine how you're going to handle that issue and issues like it. And lo and behold, you've made a policy decision, and it's all in the chat.
Yes.
And now what? now you're on record, or you do it through Twitter. You don't because you're just talking. Right. You're not realizing what you're doing.
It's self-documenting. It should be obvious what it is and where it is.
Yeah.
and yet somehow it's not. So it's weird stuff. I do feel that we have the tools a little bit now to solve the problem.
But do we have the will?
Well,
somebody call Will and get him over here.
Have the will. It's just getting the support and the right backing to get it done.
In the federal government,
and the support comes across from all levels, and that has to come from the top down. And if you don't have it, good luck.
Yeah, and the federal government is called an unfunded mandate, which it gets a lot of traction when the mandate is released, and then the next crisis hits, and that or something is funded, but in the commercial sector, it's how does it drive revenue? Like it's all about the growth. Even it's not defined as the cost of doing business yet, and you can't sell fear. I mean, you can. After Enron, you could sell fear for a few years.
Well, it drove compliance. Remember you go back to the trade shows, and on this side of the aisle, there's a vendor selling compliance tools so you can stay out of jail. And on this side of the aisle, there's a law enforcement package so you can put people in jail for the same reasons.
Yeah. Well, for 5 years, you couldn't go to a trade show without seeing, a huge chunk of the program about Sarbanes-Oxley and going on. And you never hear about it now unless you're in a training session about compliance and why you have to pay attention to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley. But it's not in the trade shows anymore. And it's not the requirements gone away. It's the focus of selling there because they realize it's, what is and is not. And it's the core requirements.
So what is it? It's the latest shiny object?
Well, it's all distributed work now is a shiny object. And it can all be solved with either machine learning or it can be solved with, I haven't seen it be solved with NFTs yet. Blockchain, yes. But NFTs, not yet. But give it time. Maybe if we had a big trade show, we would see it. But, that's something we're missing. We have shows virtual. Everything's virtual. The shows are virtual. I
don't understand the whole NFT thing. I don't understand string theory either, but my life is fine without either of them.
I think that's another hallway conversation.
Yeah, I think so.
No, that's, as Donda said, that's where the hallway we start meandering around with this conversation. It's like, I got to start heading off to the next session. I says, well, I'm kind of going over here, and then we see people sitting in a coffee shop. We join them, or we join them in the bar, depending on the time of day.
The bar.
And we just sit down and keep the conversation going.
Yeah. I miss those days when we can just blabber on about anything and everything, and not only this stuff, but just, life stuff and fun stuff. So...
Yeah, we are having to keep this a little on point today from our hallway conversation.
Yes.
And no cussing.
There's that too when we complain about the lack of foundation. By the way, I've several groups I've had to talk to of late have had that. I'm currently on a project where they have a foundation and they're just trying to take it to the next level, and that's great. But there's so many groups that aren't even that far along, and it just makes me sad. And this is an area where they shouldn't, because I do a lot of work in the federal, and we have this whole thing called the National Archives and Records Administration that has training and rules and guidelines, and nobody should be at zero. And we get mandates from the executive office of when you have to do it, and those deadlines go zipping past people's heads because I guess they like the breeze in their hair, and it is shocking, how much work there is still to be done. If you're a new organization, company that just founded, I kind of get it, and there's always new startups, and there are always people who get to critical mass where they start doing it, but for larger organizations that have been around for a long time.
But there's no penalty for not doing it, really.
Until you go to court and they're like, well, what are the odds of that?
And I think
they roll the dice.
And I think Jesse posted something to this effect. It's like nobody thinks that's going to happen, and they don't think it'll happen again.
Yeah,
and I think it's like buying insurance. I don't think I'm going to have a tree run into my car, so I don't need insurance until it does.
Until you do. That's right.
So it's very much at the moment to me like trying to sell an information insurance policy, when in fact we know there's a lot more value to it operationally. And even the fines that get levied because of a breach or whatever, I still periodically amuse myself by doing the math. The fine is X million dollars, and there are so many hundreds of thousands of people affected. It's like $3 each. That's the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
I don't know that the answer is boosting the fines, because
and that's why we need to go back and make it part of the business, but add the value. Like how can this help drive revenue or productivity? And they get it conceptually, but we have to demonstrate it. I recently worked on a project where we said, hey, if we take this piece over here and focus on the content, and use, the content services to serve up the content, y'all can focus on automating this process and focus on improving that process. We will handle the content records issue. And it's working. They don't have to worry about it. When new records regulations come up, they don't have to worry about it because it applies to all content across all processes. So we solve it and we serve it up. Now, it doesn't handle the collaborative content and all the stuff we're talking about in Microsoft Teams, which seems to be the default, which is just a chat interface on top of SharePoint. But still, it does solve the process side of the equation. And it's showing progress. And I want to go to all these cool shows and talk about it, but all these shows keep getting canceled. And
Speaking of shows, I was, as you was talking, Laurence, I was thinking, how do we get that message out further than these types of shows where all of the folks on the call have the background that we have, or have some of the background that we have, or whatever it is, it's in the IG space. But I'm throwing this thought out at everybody who's listening in. Maybe it's time to branch out of just our own associations and our own little community and network. I know it's not all that little, but
no, it's not.
Maybe start having the conversations at other industry conferences.
Well,
not necessarily in the IG space.
Or maybe we should go stand at their hallways.
No, I agree. I think, we use our events to plot how to take over the other groups. Then we go out and say, hey, this is the problem, and we can solve this. We can solve at least 30% of it, so you don't have to worry about it. Go to these, industry events where they're talking about all their problems. Or we go to, I used to do that in the pharma world. I did a lot of work in the pharma space, and you go to talk about, document management, you would go to the pharma conferences and help them directly. But,
yes.
When we're talking about all these things, you're right. We need to do that because people who are tackling the same problems we are there. And they're worried about solving the business problem, of which this is just one facet. And it's a critical facet that kind of underlays everything, or whatever the word is. But it is a very common, the exact same problems across the board. And I think it's thinking about that, and everyone's trying to solve it in their vertical. And we can bring that expertise and get them to bring us, hey, we solved it, we tackled this problem here, and this other industry can go, oh, hey, we hadn't thought of that.
Well, that's how Documented earned its stripes originally.
A lot of them went and hit a vertical back in the day and did, Docs Open and iManage went legal, and then that Documents came. And that's what they've been doing. So we only have a few more minutes.
See how it went back to go forward?
Right.
See that?
only have it. Well, some things worked back in the day before this newfangled web stuff.
And I've scrolled back through the chat. Jack wrote he worked at a firm where partners stored their private airplane in offsite storage, which I just think is amazing. So we can take that plane and put a big banner behind it and fly it over the
What's the
beach
retention
this
schedule
summer.
on a plane?
There are rules about keeping the documentation about.
Well, I'm talking about the plane
flight
itself,
and
but
logs.
Yeah,
Not the plane necessarily.
I tried that. It just didn't fly.
that was a bad pun,
That
even
was
for you,
bad.
Steve.
Just saying, Steve.
Thank you very much. I'll be here all
Even
week.
take it double curve in for you. So we only have a couple minutes left before Nick kicks us out and we move to Twitter. So, if there was one thing that you feel people listening in should do to help the profession or the industry, what would you all say? See, I'm not answering this first because I haven't thought of my answer yet.
Keep at it. Keep at it.
Keep at it.
It's slow and steady. Be fortified.
Wow, that's a tough one. If you have a passion for this space, then stick with it. Don't let it go. But try and find either it's a vertical or try and find an aspect within IG that just is your niche and stick with it. But like I said earlier, don't be afraid to share your stories, and outside of this type of group and this type of panel, it's also getting your message out there so that others can learn from it. That's what this community is about. So I know it's scary doing public speaking, but start small, grow big is my thing.
Well,
So get yourself into a chapter or of an association, or at least ask them. Maybe you don't have to be a part of a chapter, or maybe it's another industry association such as IAPP. Anything. Get your story out there, but also try and help your community by sharing that.
Yeah, you don't even have to speak. It's, doing some of these things. It's harder when it's all virtual and you don't really have these actual hallway conversations. But I think it's getting out there and sharing your story and listening to stories and spreading the, ideas, because we're all trying to solve essentially the same problem. There are different variations and flavors. And I think, there's no one winning formula, but there's a core that we can work together towards and kind of get out there and say, hey, I did this and it actually worked, and see if it can be replicated. And if we can, then maybe we can start making progress in such a way that maybe my grandkids won't have to deal with this problem as opposed to my kids. I have no grandkids yet, so there's still plenty of time for us to solve this problem.
Jeez.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of where we are, where we stand. 1 minute left. So,
Well, this is fun.
this is fun.
Nice to see you guys.
It's good to see y'all.
It was great to see you all.
And
Absolutely.
and
I'm sure we'll do it again soon.
well, yeah. And one day we'll get to do this again in person. Maybe in
Yes.
Providence.
I think it's a Tuesday.
Oh
That
yeah,
Monday.
there's something coming up with that, isn't there? There's some Providence possible event in 2022. I'm so looking forward to it. It must be on the website. We'll have to go
No more
look there
COVID.
later.
No more COVID. No more COVID.
Although I will be at AIM this year, so I'm hoping to see y'all.
Oh, here comes Nick. Kick us off.